So thank you for joining me today. I still see that there's a few more people that are joining our presentation as we move forward, and that's perfectly fine. My name is Carla Steinberg Fall, and I am with Minitex in University of Minnesota. We are presenting on the second of our six-part series on project management for libraries. Today, our speaker is Francine Alt-Green with Hennepin County Libraries. She is the IT project manager, and she is going to be speaking on scope, project scope, and the charter. So take it away, Francine. Oh, Francine, you want to unmute?
Details. Thank you. So start again. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Welcome to the Project Management for Libraries webinar series. And we're going to talk about the scope and the charter today. And as Carla mentioned, yeah, I am happy to answer questions at any time. And then of course we'll have time at the end. So just a little bit of kind of what we're going to go over today, talking about the scope and the charter aspects of project management. And we'll get into some little more details of the scope and the charter. And then I'd like to hear a bit from you. What are you doing for project management? I think I actually clicked it. So what is the scope and charter? They are tools to help you with define your project and start out your project. It's planning up front can be about 70% of your project, and then adding communication, that's 70 to 90% of your project is the planning up front and the communication. The scope and charter will help you define what the project will do and what the project will not do. This will define, it'll also define who is on that project team. And then overall, just keep in mind the scope and the charter and all other project management tools. The goal is to smoothly implement projects that will answer or resolve the need. So this scope and charter are defining what the need is. Are you clicking? Because I didn't even touch it and it moved. Oh, it's actually moving on. Okay, so I did just a couple of quick searches on Bing and Wikipedia to identify what it is. What is the scope? And that is the extent of the area or subject matter that something deals with, or to which extent is relevant. And I'm just, the Wikipedia got a little bit more in depth about project management itself. So scope is defined the features of a product, or the scope required to start a project, and the features the product would have that would meet its stakeholders' requirements. So I just, some key words there: project, product, and stakeholders. So your project is to implement the product, and stakeholders are who it's affecting. And it could be everybody, but it doesn't necessarily mean all those stakeholders are on your project team. So this is some key terms for project management and going forward. So scope, what will the project work on? What will the project not work on? It's measurable. Can you measure what this project will be with the scope? It defines what the outcome will be. It must have a stakeholder buy-in and agreement or support. And some of that is that the buy-in is key really to any project. So why are you doing the project? Are you mandated to do something? Are you, we're doing it to improve something? And we need to have the support from your stakeholder or sponsor to make sure that it is a successful project. Without that, it's pretty hard to be successful. But there's ways of getting that buy-in and support, and that is communication. So that said, scope, it's not always written in stone. You started out with, this is your starting point to say, this is what we think we're going to start with, and you move from there. So let's keep moving on. So scope creep is next piece about talking about scope is, what is scope creep? So just quick definition again from Wikipedia, and I chose sources that were readily available to everybody. For about Wikipedia is one of those, just internet search. It's scope creep, requirement creep, or kitchen sink syndrome. Sometimes people call that. I just call it scope creep. And key words here, continuous or uncontrolled growth in a project scope. So things change all the time within projects, and you just need to deal with it. And sometimes you may be given things and you can't do anything about it. You got to quickly do it. And that would I consider scope creep. But there's changes that come along and you're able to assess how will this add to our project? Will it extend our project? And where are we going with it? Will it help our project? Or is it just kind of, we call it gold plating, where you add things in because we think users want it, but it really isn't needed. So it's continuous or uncontrolled growth. If you control that growth, then it's scope creep, but it's controlled, and it maybe actually just changes your scope, all in how you look at the whole project in perspective. So examples, sometimes it happens and you just have to deal with it. Okay, I would say it usually happens. It's just what it is and you need to deal with it. So some examples I have of projects that happen. So 2020, we had all this CARES money and we were purchasing computers and devices, or Chromebooks and laptops actually, for our residents with that CARES money. And we were given a certain amount of money, and then all of a sudden we were given more money. And so we had to deal with that and go and purchase more devices. But within, it's not just purchasing, it's figuring out how are we going to distribute those devices to other people within our county and who's going to get them. So we were given money, we put it together really quick. Like the scope creep was we had tons of money thrown at us, but we made it work, and we had over 8,000 devices given out to our residents of Hennepin County. So huge deal, but major scope creep there. Another example, this is pretty common in development projects. So you're given a project to develop some kind of software. Along the way, you hear, here's a function. Hey, we didn't know about this, but we have to have it. Well, it kind of lends itself to the agile methodology, but it's still scope creep. So you take a look at that and say, okay, can we add it in? Or if we don't add it in, what happens? Or we're farther enough along, can we wait and have it phase 2? So these are different ways of handling that scope creep, but identifying this is actually scope creep. You know, the agile methodology, you're able to say, okay, we're going to do this function here, and we just brought it to our users and found out, oh, they need this function. So that lends itself well to development. So just an example of scope creep and how to handle it in different ways. But every project will present a time to reassess that scope. And let's just move on to the next. So just some examples of scope and of identify what it is we're talking about. So a not so good charter or scope. This project will develop a computer program. It's not measuring anything. It's not giving any details of timeline. It's just not good. So better, this project will develop a computer program to allow staff to print guest computer passes for using the public computers. It will be created in Perl and needs to be done in 3 months. It will not be accessible on the public workstations and only on staff workstations. Better, it's giving you a defined, here's what we're doing it on, and here's the timeline that we have to have it done in. So a much more encompassed scope. Why are we doing it? And well, it would be better if it had the why. There were definitely ways to improve that. So this is an example of a more extreme or bigger project scope. I pulled it out of the charter from one of my projects. It's a request for proposal, or RFP. We knew we were going to have it pretty complex because other county departments needed to have this background. So we put it into our charter so that we could send that to them and they would understand, why are we doing it? What's our background here? What are the goals we're hoping to achieve? And what is in scope and what's out of scope? This is very basic, pulled it right out of the charter so that we could identify what it was. And it was very tedious, but we got there. It took a long time to kind of pull some of these pieces together. And then from there, we then identified specific line items, what we were going to assess each vendor on and rate them for why we were going to maybe not go with them or possibly go with them. And I have to say, a lot of it was IT, but there was a lot of user requirements within there as well of what we could use and what we needed to use. But scope, this is what it was about. And this is from a basic form within Hennepin County. We have a pretty robust project management office. Sometimes, nothing's perfect. You adjust it for what you need it to be. So you take that scope and you put it into your charter. Create a charter when envisioning the project. So this is the beginning of it so that everybody is on the same page. Some organizations call it something else like, initiation form or authorization or definition or even a statement. Another form I've seen is a definition, a napkin definition, where it's just one pager and it has specific fields. And for smaller projects and really a lot of library projects in the programming, things like that, that could work, the napkin definition, but it's just another form. And each organization may use their own version of a charter. So I'm curious here, are some organizations out there, people, are you using any version of a charter currently? And Carla, could you do that?
Sure. Let me bring
Thank
up
you.
the poll. And launching the poll, go ahead and submit a yes or no.
It will be interesting to see where.
I'll give it another 15 seconds.
Okay.
All righty, I'm going to end this poll and then I'll show you.
So can everyone see it now?
Yeah, they should be able to see it.
Okay. All right, so it's looking like a majority of organizations do not have a defined charter. Okay, so we can talk to that a little bit and kind of figure out next steps for you. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. Thank you, Carla, that was great. So if people can't see it, 76% do not have a charter and 24% do. So I'll click to the next slide. So what's in a charter? Well, you start with your scope, and this is what is our need, what is the project for and not for, and then who's on the project team. So it really just identifies who's going to be working on this project. So depending on how political it could be, it can take a month or 2 months even to define who's going to be on the project, and that really just depends on who's available, what is the skill set, and what needs to happen within that project. Other projects, it's like a given. Okay, these people will be on that team. So work within your organization and to define that. Also, I would like to say, people on your project team, make sure that they're given time to work on the project, because it can kill a project where people are identified to work on it, but they're always on desk. So then they never have time. So another key piece for working on the project. Who are the stakeholders? Well, this is anyone who could be affected by the project. And so it could be line staff, it could be management, it could be a vendor, but probably vendors we won't bring in too much, but some of these stakeholders will be on the project team. Not all of them. I would say a majority, there'll be 1 or 2 people who will go out and ask those other stakeholders, what do they think about this, or what would they need, or they just know what those other stakeholders need and they're representing them on the project team. So another key important role is the sponsor. And this sponsor will say, okay, I'm going to support this project, and if you have problems, here's some, I will remove roadblocks, but they'll also find money if you need money to do it. They will support why you're working on it. So the timeline is the next piece on there as well. So is there a set date for the project to be completed? Is it more of a get it done when you can? Or is it a loose time frame of it could be done in spring, but just define it and know it. All of them are fine. There's no wrong answer. It just depends on the project you're working on. A lot of projects have a deadline that we need to have this done to implement that. So then that's just understand what it is. If there's a definite date, you can set that date and then work back from it to identify what needs to happen when. And then understand what the risk is. What happens if the project is not completed? What will not happen if it's not completed? And what will happen if it is completed? Or are we going to be fined if we can't have it done in time because we won't be able to pull some certain data? It all just depends, but just understand it. And then constraints or dependencies. And this could be a person who's needed for the project because they're the key one who holds all the data in one place. They're not available until a certain time. So then you have to build it into your project. They're available here. Maybe you could do work other than what they are needed for before they are needed to build up. That it just depends. And is there money available? And is it only available in a certain time? So the computer project I mentioned earlier, we only had the monies in 2020. And we had to use it and we had to distribute the devices in 2020, which we did. And so that was a certain time frame we had to have it in. Maybe it must be done within a certain time, as in time of year, or because this has to be done so that it can move on to do another project. Just understand what the constraints or dependencies within that project, and it should be in the charter. So when you start out that project team, you bring it with you and you read through it and work through it, and everybody's on the same page. So we did our poll to understand what everybody was doing, and most people don't have a form, but I just did a quick search online and I found a couple of sites, and these are in the PDF as well, but I'll say it was just templatearchive.com/project-charter, or these are just a couple of them. I did a quick search, handypdf.com/cat/project-charter-template. Just some places to get some ideas of charters that work for you. What I highly recommend is just use what works for you and your organization and pick something that you'll stick with. So once you start having people use this form, keep using it consistently so that everyone gets used to seeing it. So that if they're looking for information, they know on the form of where they're going to find that information. It sounds kind of silly, but that is what it does work, and it makes a difference for people to really buy in to continue doing it. Oh, I lost my screen, but I'll put it back up. There we go. So that's about what I had today. Are there any questions?
Again, you can either type them into the chat box or feel free to go ahead and unmute if you like.
Yeah. Is this what you were looking to hear today?
Well, one question that I had, Francine,
Okay.
was, is it important to have the project scope and charter when you're doing it, even for something small, like adding a couple extra computer spaces, or whatever the size of the project might be? Is it important to have that document?
I would say it's important to have the scope in a paragraph, just a paragraph written. If depending on the size of the project, maybe you don't want to do a full charter, but you at least do your scope so that you're both or all working on the same aspect or say you're all working forward onto the same project and have the same idea in mind, because invariably you'll come in and one person will say, we're going to expand the cubes, and that means something different to one person than it means to another person. So we're trying to get everybody on the same page going forward. I do see there's a couple questions. When does a job become a project in your organization? So that's a good question. So if it's something that happens every day, that's really a job. If this is a one-time deal, a project to implement something different, then it's a project. If it's like what I see happen too sometimes is that people will, we're going to put in a new program for showing to people, and then that um, it can be a project to create the program, but then once it's in, it's day-to-day work. Is that helpful? Okay.
I think that's helpful.
Okay. There's a few more questions. Who should be working on creating the scope and charter? Well, okay, so I'll just kind of go back to how, so I have one project now that we're just starting, and I have she's really a division manager, and she's taken some project management, and she's done really well with identifying that scope, identifying who's going to be on the team, and then bringing it forward. And then that is really ideal for me, but it can be anybody. If you're assigned as the project manager or the lead, say the lead on a project, because that's how I hear it a lot. You're the lead on this project. So that means that you as a lead should be working on this scope and taking it back to say, who gave you that project to work on, to identify, is this what you're thinking about? Am I on the right track? And it helps you as well, because then it identifies that we are working together, and that if something happens, that person who gave you the project will be your sponsor to say, yep, I got a call coming in, I'm going to close that. So I guess I have to say it depends. It depends on how big the project is. It depends on what you start, where you are in the project. Sometimes I'm brought into projects that are already well underway, and I'll take a step back and look at, okay, what is it that we're doing? And maybe we need to talk to the project team about that and say, okay, bring me up to speed, help me understand what we're doing. I hope that answers your question. And feel free to ask more if I didn't. So next question, what would you recommend doing if a person in a project has to be on the desk most of the workday? How best do you delegate responsibilities during a project? Well, I would say if they have to be on the desk, I would ask, well, first I have them ask their supervisor, can they have some off-desk time so they can work on the project? And if that doesn't work, then I have gone to the division manager or the manager and said, hey, we need to work on this project, and this person is the key person for the project, and I need them off desk so that they can work on it a little bit. Eventually, they need some time to work on the project, and if they're on desk, they can't always do it. And how best do you delegate responsibilities during a project? I actually don't delegate. What I say, we will be working through a project team, and we'll identify, here, all these things need to be done. And I'll say, who's going to do that? So I let them delegate themselves. Now, if people don't offer up to do so, and sometimes I take on some of those things, but it's the team who decides who's going to work on what, and then I document who's going to work on it, and we come back and we talk about it, and we bring it back to the team. And then we have, these ideas are so new. Go ahead.
Oh, Francie, I have a question that was sent to me.
Okay.
We have been a 2-person team and are now being asked to work with others, a team of about 6. Can you give some tips on getting started with project management? And I think that is key to project scope creep. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it depends. It depends on the project. I mean, if you're already in the middle of a project and more people are being brought on, well, why? And are they adding to the project, or should they have been involved all along? I would, because you now have to work together more on the team, pull together your scope and your charter and say, here's what we're working on and what we have been working on, and what are they bringing to the team that you didn't have. I'm assuming it's positive in that you could use more people on that team to work forward, but yeah, it depends, because I have had some projects start out with just a couple people, and it's identified we need people from all these different areas to be on this team now, and then we pull them in and talk through the scope and make sure they're in agreement and have them add some feedback to that scope or charter so that we go forward. And they may identify some tasks that need to happen that we didn't know about.
I think roles and responsibilities is also a key piece there.
Yep. Yep, exactly. So why are they being brought on, and what is their role within the team then? And the project manager has, I mean, they're not in charge, but they facilitate most of the time. So I've taken a fair amount of facilitation sessions, which has helped me a lot to just be able to facilitate amongst a group of people. I don't make the decisions on the team, but I can make suggestions, and they can throw them out or use them. I mean, but it's a big part of is just get the thought process going. But it can be a problem if you have some people brought onto your team who are, it's my way or the highway, and that doesn't always work well. Okay, it never works well. But so I hope that is that answering the question. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Where was I?
I think Erin Z would be the next one up, and she's asking, yes, this is helpful. We found out we have the opportunity to have our children's area refreshed by a fiscal sponsor that is interested in birth through K. We do have a chartered template that we use in our system, but this gives me information to think about. Okay, so it's more of a
Oh, good.
comment.
Good. I'm glad. I think Erica was just saying she's absorbing as well. That's great too. Happy to answer questions too if they come up. If you can feel free to email me or Carla.
And looks like Luann has a question. What are some sticking points that you have run into, especially in creating the scope and charter with a distributed project, or in sticking to the scope in a distributed project, where individuals have different supervisors' lines of reporting?
Okay. Just to clarify, when you're saying distributed project, you're saying throughout the whole library system, and it's people from all different areas within the library. Is that what you're meaning by distributed project? I can, so,
well, outside of the library too, so ITS
okay.
in an academic library setting.
Okay. I work in public county, but I do work on some projects where we have to work with the county IT, the county purchasing, county graphics, the county, and then within the library as well, we have library services as well as library IT and maybe the collections. So I think the piece is, first of all, starting out defining what it is you need to have done. And the sticking piece comes when those other areas don't really understand what we need from them. Or so we've had sticking pieces with our county IT where they're implementing new rules, and okay, so then we have to change our whole network around, and that's been kind of a sticking point because it takes much longer. It's there's could be more problems. I think the key to any sticking point is communication and identifying what it is you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and how does that impact that other organization. Is that what you're referring to, or did you have some other kind of sticking points?
That helps. And after I wrote it, I realized it probably goes back to the first webinar on communication.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, but communication is a huge, huge part of project management. And majority of my time is spent communicating with individual and then following up, but as well as communicating out what do we need to communicate to staff? What do we need to communicate to the public? Maybe not yet. And what do we need to communicate up the chain to management so they understand what's happening so that if they get a question, they can support us in something that we need. But yeah, it all kind of comes back to communication. Okay. Thank you for the question. I keeps jumping around, so I'm not really sure exactly.
I think Sarah Rasmussen's question is next.
Okay.
Do you
Sort
see-
of. Yep, I do. Sort of a knowledge management question. Who needs to read the project charter? Everyone working on the project versus everyone impacted by the project versus us versus using your previous example of buying the computers who received a copy of the charter. Okay, I have to confess on that computer one, we didn't actually have a full charter. It was that quick of a project. I was contacted by the BIO and said, hey, help me. And that moved along. But I used my knowledge of tasks that needed to happen to make that happen to move it along. But we did it really verbally. Here's what we're going to do. But if you have a specific charter, I try to have it done, or I call it a draft. I pull it all together. I have the sponsor look it through and say, yes, this is what we think we want to do. Then when we have our kickoff meeting, I bring that to when it's an official team working on it and say, what do you think? Do you have suggestions? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? What is a starting point? Most times people have one or two suggestions, but it just kind of it goes and people say, okay, because it's really meant to be, here's what we're working on. And so that project team for sure then looks at it and agrees to it. Then after they've agreed to it, what I'm doing now, because we're now in a Teams world, I have a team site for every project, and I put that charter into the team site. And anyone who has access to it can see it. Now, in the previous world, we used to have that so anyone can see it. And if that's still a need, so that people feel like they want to have access to it, then I create a site on our SharePoint site, which anyone can have access to, and I'll put it in there. And it's fine for anyone to see that charter. And in our system, there's a lot of people who have a kind of a thirst for knowledge, and they want to have that information. So I'm happy sharing it. There's no secret, and it's, in my opinion, better to have more people see what it is that we're working on than to hide it and then spring it on people. So I think it's best after the team has agreed to it to put it out so that anyone can have a look at it. It's not necessarily that they're going to come back and say, I don't want to do that, but it's saying, here's what we're doing. And you're welcome. I'm happy to be here today. It's fun to see so many people here. Any other questions? I think we've gotten through them.
Yeah, I think we've gotten through the ones in the chat as well.
So scope and charter are just a piece of project management tools to help the goal, which is implement your project in a smooth, successful way. And there'll be other tools that we will be discussing in the different webinars. Here's a question. When communicating, how do you avoid information overload? Good question. So keep it simple. That's been the key piece. And we really have a fair amount of conversations about when do we communicate and what do we communicate. So typically, either I or someone else on our team will write a blurb that we're going to put out, especially, it depends on who we're communicating to, but especially if we're going to put it out to all library staff to see the communication, we'll either brainstorm or some of us will write it together, and I always have somebody else read it over regardless, because they have so much more insight to looking at someone's writing and to say, here's what they're going to want to know. And so have it read over by a few people, identify at what point, what are you going to communicate? And that does help with that communication or information overload. So it's not everything in the kitchen sink, it's key messages at key times. And we put it out on our SharePoint site. We have a site where in the beginning it's announcements so that anyone can go there. But we are finding now things have changed around because we've done these upgradings. We also have a team site where discussions can happen, and I put it in there as well. And then everybody can communicate or write back and ask questions if they want. And between those two pieces, communicating out to the staff seems to work. We still have email, but it's seeming like most people are doing the team site versus the announcements in one way or another, and that's where they're getting their information. Here's one more question. This question may itself be out of scope. However, do you have recommendations when in a culture that has not entirely embraced project management practices? That's really hard. I've been there, and I'd say take one step at a time and start small and really start out with that scope document first. What exactly are we doing? And start talking it through, and start with a real simple charter. And you don't have to say, we're doing the charter. You can just say, okay, for me, I need to have this information, and start identifying it. A big key to that too is having your management back it and support it and say, we will take a project management approach to our projects so that we all understand what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And we'll understand who's on that team and what needs to happen. So it can be pretty rough in the beginning until people get in, because I have definitely seen some, I guess more IT people more than anything, where they're like, I don't need her. I don't need a project manager. But in the end, there's benefits seen. So you start out, you do a few projects, and then you'll see the benefit, and they'll see the benefit. More importantly, the management will see the benefit, and then it'll start kicking off from there. And then, what if management doesn't support project management? I would want to find out why and have a conversation with them and help them understand how it can benefit the organization. Again, in the end, it's really about communication. That's a tough one too. I've been pretty fortunate that my organization that I'm in is very much backing the project management at this time. And when creating measurables, do you use rubrics? Maybe in the end it becomes rubrics, but we don't really have a methodology in creating the measurables. And we may talk about it in the beginning of what do we need to measure. I haven't gotten into that to be that complex to create the measurables. But some projects would. I can really see how that would. A lot of my projects are implementing new applications. Where if you're implementing a new program, I can see how you would probably want more measurables in using the rubrics. And I think it's a great idea to use PM tools, scope, chart, etc., without actually using the PM jargon as a way to slip in PM processes in a resistant culture. Thanks for that idea. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you kind of have to do that. And then in the end, you come out and you start saying, yep, here's the charter after you've already done it. And then they're like, oh, yeah. This presentation of project management is great. Too many workshops I have been in get into weeds on tools and specifics, which can be overwhelming. Oh yeah, thanks for that feedback. I really try not to get into the tools too much because, I mean, it's all what's in it, and the tools help you, but project management is not. There's tools that help you, but in the end, it's really communication. So, yeah, thanks for that feedback. Any other questions? As I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to answer questions if you think of something later on.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap things up. Thank you, Francine, for your insight and your
Yep.
presentation. This has been very helpful and eye-opening. I just want to reiterate that, like George stated, you don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of project management, or use the specific jargon, excuse me, but being able to incorporate the aspects into the work can really take you far, and really helps your project succeed, because we're all doing projects. Libraries are nothing without their projects. So I think I will go ahead and close out today's session, and please look towards your either the Professional Development Alliance that you registered through for this session, or through the Level Up Minnesota or the Minitex website for the next 4 sessions in the series. I will send out an email, as I stated in the beginning, when this recording is available, along with a link to our feedback form. So thank you all for participating. And again, thank you, Francine, for joining us today.
Very welcome. Thanks, Carla, for organizing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.